What if I told you that the smallest coin in your pocket could be worth thousands of dollars today? These Canadian 1-cent coins may look ordinary, but behind their tiny size hides incredible history, rare varieties, and shocking market values. Stay with me because by the end, you'll never look at a penny the same way again. Let's moving on. First up, 2001 Canada 1-cent coin. The 2001 Canada 1-cent coin may look like just another small copper-plated steel penny in your pocket, but for collectors and numismatists, this coin carries with it a remarkable story, tied to the final chapter of Canada's long-running 1-cent piece series. At first glance, the coin showcases the familiar maple leaf twig design, created by G.E. Kruger Gray, a design that had been in use since 1937 and became one of the most iconic symbols of Canadian coinage. On the obverse, you will see the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, specifically the fourth effigy sculpted by Dora de Petery Hunt, which was introduced in 1990 and remained until 2003. This portrait shows a more mature and distinguished queen without a crown, reflecting a natural and modernized presentation of the monarch. The 2001 issue is interesting because it comes from the early 2000s, a time when the Royal Canadian Mint was transitioning in how it manufactured its coins. For decades, Canadian cents were struck primarily from bronze, but by the late 1990s, the rising cost of copper forced the mint to adopt copper-plated zinc and later copper-plated steel planchets. The 2001 cent is a copper-plated steel coin, which means that underneath its shiny, reddish-brown appearance lies a steel core. This was a major change for Canadian coinage and marked a shift towards cost efficiency and innovation in minting. Because of the steel core, these coins also respond to magnets, something earlier bronze issues never did. Collectors pay attention to the 2001 cent not only for its place in this transition, but also because of the varieties and striking quality. Some coins from this year were produced with exceptional brilliance, especially in uncirculated and proof-like sets. The Royal Canadian Mint is known for producing collector sets with higher quality strikes, where coins feature sharp details, smooth fields, and minimal blemishes. These 2001 examples, preserved in original mint packaging, often attract collectors who want pristine examples of a coin that circulated heavily in everyday Canadian life. Another interesting element lies in the historical context. By 2001, the Canadian cent was already being questioned for its practicality. Inflation had reduced its purchasing power, and there were public debates about whether the penny should be retired. This discussion continued for years, ultimately leading to the penny's discontinuation in 2012. That means coins like the 2001 cent represent one of the final decades of a denomination that lasted for over 150 years in Canada. Holding one is like holding a piece of the conversation about the changing value of money in the modern world. When we talk about value, collectors usually consider condition, rarity, and demand. While millions of 2001 cents were struck for circulation, the coins that bring in real collector interest are those preserved in mint state or higher grades, often graded by professional services like PCGS or ICCS. Coins in average circulated condition are typically worth only a cent or two, but uncirculated examples with flawless surfaces can sell for far more. A high-grade mint state 2001 Canada 1-cent coin, especially one graded MS66 or higher, can command a value of around $15,000 USD in the current numismatic market, depending on eye appeal and buyer demand. Proof-like or specimen strike examples, especially in original mint packaging, can also reach higher levels because of their striking brilliance and rarity outside collector circles. So while the 2001 Canada 1-cent coin may seem like just another common penny to most people, it's far more than that to numismatists. It reflects Canada's economic changes, its minting innovations, and the beginning of the end for a denomination that had been part of Canadian life for generations. Collectors treasure it not for its scarcity, but for what it represents, a turning point in Canadian currency history. Its humble face value hides the fact that in pristine condition, it has already become a collector's item worth dozens of times its original value. Next up, 1997 Canada 1-cent coin. The 1997 Canada 1-cent coin is one of those fascinating little pieces of numismatic history that quietly tells a bigger story than most people realize. At first glance, it looks almost identical to every Canadian penny minted for decades. The iconic maple leaf twig designed by George Edward, Kruger Gray on the reverse and Queen Elizabeth T's effigy on the obverse. But once you look closer, this coin represents a major technological and economic shift in Canadian minting history. By 1997, Canada had already begun experimenting with new compositions for its coins. For most of its life, the 1-cent coin had been made of bronze, a mix of copper, tin, and zinc. However, the rising cost of copper during the late 20th century made bronze cents increasingly expensive to produce. In fact, the metal content of the coins was getting dangerously close to, or even exceeding, their actual face value. To solve this issue, the Royal Canadian Mint transitioned to a new composition in 1997, copper-plated zinc. This marked the very first year where the entire mintage of Canadian cents was produced with this cost-effective new formula. The 1997 penny has a thin layer of copper that gives it the traditional reddish-brown appearance Canadians were used to, but underneath lies a zinc core instead of solid bronze. This change in metal is crucial for collectors because it created a dividing line in Canadian cent history. Coins from before 1997 were bronze, and coins from 1997 onward until 2000 were primarily copper-plated zinc, followed by copper-plated steel in 2001. That makes the 1997 issue historically significant as the first full mintage year of this new material. On the obverse, the coin features the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, created by Dora de Pettery Hunt. Introduced in 1990, this effigy shows the Queen without a crown, facing right, and is notable for being the first effigy of the Queen designed by a Canadian artist to be used on Canadian coinage. That detail makes coins from this era particularly special for Canadian collectors, as it highlights national artistry. Now, while the 1997 penny was minted in huge numbers for circulation, it is far from boring. Collectors pay close attention to this date because of varieties, mint set examples, and the fact that it marks the beginning of the copper-plated era. Circulating examples are extremely common, but higher-grade specimens, especially those pulled fresh from mint sets, showcase incredible luster and sharp details. The Royal Canadian Mint also produced proof-like and specimen strikes for collector sets, and these coins are far superior in quality compared to circulation strikes. What's also worth noting is the timing. In 1997, the penny still played an everyday role in Canadian life. You could use it to pay exact change in shops, and most people still carried handfuls of them in their pockets or purses. No one really thought that only 15 years later, in 2012, the penny would be discontinued entirely. That gives coins like the 1997 cent a nostalgic charm. They're a reminder of a time when every cent still mattered and was part of daily transactions. In terms of value, circulated 1997 Canada 1-cent coins are generally only worth their face value. However, for collectors seeking high-grade examples, the story changes dramatically. Uncirculated coins graded MS65 or higher can bring in far more. Coins in pristine mint state condition, especially those graded MS66 and MS67, are considered condition rarities and are highly sought after. In today's numismatic market, a superb gem, 1997 Canada 1-cent coin in high-grade mint state can fetch around 16,500 USD. Proof-like or specimen examples, especially preserved in their original mint packaging, also command higher premiums, often sought after by collectors building date sets or focusing on transitional issues. So, the 1997 Canada 1-cent coin is more than just a common penny. It's the start of a new era in Canadian coinage. It tells the story of how rising production costs forced the mint to rethink coinage materials, marking the transition from bronze to plated coins. For collectors, it's an essential piece that represents innovation, adaptation, and the gradual lead-up to the end of the Canadian penny itself. Next up, 1993 Canada 1-cent coin. The 1993 Canada 1-cent coin may not look extraordinary at first sight, but to coin collectors and those who understand the subtleties of numismatic history, this coin holds a special place as part of the final years of the traditional bronze penny era. It's one of the last full years before the Royal Canadian Mint began introducing plated compositions later in the decade, which makes it both a nostalgic and transitional piece in Canadian coinage. The reverse of the coin carries the classic and timeless maple leaf twig designed by George Edward Kruger Gray, which first appeared on Canadian cents in 1937 under King George VI and became an enduring symbol of the nation. By 1993, this design had been in continuous use for more than half a century, and it had become one of the most recognizable coin designs in Canada, embodying both national pride and consistency in everyday coinage. On the obverse, we see Queen Elizabeth II's effigy by Dora de Pettery Hunt, which was introduced in 1990 and continued through 2003. This portrait was the first effigy of the Queen on Canadian coinage to be designed by a Canadian artist, marking a significant moment in Canadian numismatic artistry. The depiction shows the Queen without a crown, a softer and more modern portrayal that emphasized her role as a person and leader, rather than just a monarch. This subtle shift in presentation connected with Canadians on a cultural level and was considered groundbreaking at the time. The composition of the 1993 cent is particularly important because it represents one of the last years where the coin was made of bronze. The alloy consisted of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc, giving the coin its classic rich reddish-brown appearance. Unlike the plated zinc or steel coins that came later, these bronze cents carried a distinct weight and feel, something collectors often comment on when comparing coins from the 1990s to later issues. The 1993 cent, therefore, is part of the final era where the Canadian penny still held onto its traditional form before cost-saving measures fundamentally altered the coin's identity. Another layer of significance lies in how the Royal Canadian Mint was operating during this time. The early 1990s were a period of modernization for the mint, with new technologies and improved minting processes, allowing for sharper designs and better quality strikes. Proof-like sets and specimen strikes from 1993, in particular, display remarkable craftsmanship, with mirrored fields and frosted devices that highlight the details of the maple leaf in the Queen's portrait. Collectors often prize these examples because they showcase the very best of Canadian minting in the final days of the bronze cent era. When we look at the historical context, the 1993 penny also represents a moment when the 1-cent coin still had an everyday purpose in Canadian life. People still counted out pennies to pay exact change. Children collected them in jars, and banks processed them in massive quantities. Little did anyone know that just 2 decades later, in 2012, the penny would be discontinued and withdrawn from circulation altogether. For collectors today, holding a 1993 penny is like holding onto a piece of Canadian economic and cultural history, a reminder of how quickly everyday objects can vanish from our lives. Now let's turn to value, which is where things get especially interesting for serious collectors. Circulated 1993, pennies are still common, and typically worth just their face value. However, when you step into the world of high-grade uncirculated examples, the picture changes dramatically. Coins that have survived in mint state condition without scratches, discoloration, or handling marks are far scarcer than people realize. Professional grading companies like ICCS and PCGS evaluate these coins, and examples that achieve MS65, MS66, or higher are considered true gems. In today's numismatic market, a top-quality mint state 1993 Canada 1-cent coin, especially one graded MS66 or better, can bring in around 21,000 USD, making it a surprisingly valuable piece for such a small denomination. Proof-like and specimen coins from mint sets can also command high premiums, particularly when kept in their original packaging, as their superior striking quality makes them highly desirable for collectors seeking the best of the best. So while the 1993 Canada 1-cent coin may seem like an ordinary penny at first glance, it is in fact a key piece in the timeline of Canadian numismatics. It represents the final years of the Bronze Era, the artistry of a Canadian-designed effigy, and the enduring legacy of the maple leaf design. Collectors see it not only as a coin of intrinsic beauty but also as a symbol of change, a coin that bridges the gap between tradition and transition. In high grade, it transforms from a simple penny into a coveted collectible worth hundreds of times its face value, proving once again that every coin has a story far richer than its denomination suggests. Next up, 1985 Canada 1-cent coin. The 1985 Canada 1-cent coin stands out in Canadian numismatics as one of the most fascinating and historically significant modern pennies. At first glance, it carries the same iconic features we associate with Canadian cents of the late 20th century, the maple leaf twig design on the reverse and the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. But for collectors, the 1985 cent is much more than just another small copper coin. It marks the introduction of a major change in Canadian coinage, and this makes it one of the most collectible issues of its era. On the reverse, we once again see George Edward Kruger Gray's classic maple leaf twig design, which had been in use since 1937. This enduring symbol of Canadian pride features two maple leaves attached to a twig, representing strength, endurance, and growth. The reverse design remained unchanged through decades. But the 1985 cent is unique not because of its reverse, but because of its obverse. The obverse is where the real story begins. In 1985, the Royal Canadian Mint introduced a brand new portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, created by Canadian artist Dora de Pedery Hunt. This portrait, which replaced Arnold Machine's earlier effigy, was the first time in Canadian history that a Canadian artist's work was chosen for the Queen's image on coinage. The new design depicted a more mature Elizabeth II, uncrowned, facing right. It was a softer, more natural portrayal, and it broke with the long-standing tradition of showing the Queen wearing a tiara or crown. This was a monumental change in the appearance of Canadian coinage and is one of the key reasons why the 1985 cent is so historically significant. Because this was the first year of issue for the new effigy, the 1985 cent quickly became a must-have for collectors building typesets or specializing in Canadian modern coinage. Every collection that focuses on Queen Elizabeth T's portraits must include this coin because it represents the transition from the machine portrait to the de Pedery Hunt portrait. This moment in coinage history links directly to Canadian identity, as it was the first time Canada placed its own artistic stamp on the nation's circulating money. Composition-wise, the 1985 cent was still struck in the traditional bronze alloy, made of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. This gives it the heavier, richer feel that collectors often note when comparing it to later plated coins. It has that deep, reddish-brown color that characterizes pre-1997 Canadian cents, and this adds to its nostalgic appeal. These were still the days when pennies were everywhere, in jars, in pockets, on the ground, and in children's piggy banks. But there is also a fascinating numismatic twist with this coin. The 1985 Canada 1 cent has two major varieties that collectors actively seek. These are known as the pointed 5 and the blunt 5 varieties. The difference lies in the shape of the numeral 5 in the date. On the pointed 5 variety, the bottom stroke of the number has a sharper, more tapered point, while on the blunt 5 variety, the stroke is shorter and ends more bluntly. At the time of striking, both styles were produced, and this has created an exciting variety hunt for collectors. The pointed 5 is generally considered scarcer and more valuable, while the blunt 5 is more common. Collectors who can secure both varieties in mint state condition have an especially prized set of 1985 cents. In terms of minting quality, circulation strikes were produced in massive quantities, but proof-like and specimen issues, sold in collector sets, display much higher levels of detail and finish. Proof-like examples show brilliant mirrored fields, while specimen strikes feature a satin-like texture and exceptional sharpness. These higher quality issues are far less common today in pristine condition, especially when still housed in their original mint packaging. Now let's talk value, which is where things get really interesting. Circulated examples of the 1985 Canada 1 cent coin are still common and usually only worth face value or slightly more. However, when you step into higher-grade uncirculated coins, the story changes dramatically. Mint state examples graded MS65 or higher begin to climb in value, and the pointed 5 variety in particular commands a premium. A superb gem pointed 5, graded MS66 or above, can fetch around $25,000 USD in today's numismatic market. The blunt 5 variety is less valuable but still collectible, often reaching prices of $25,000 to $75,000 USD in high-grade condition. Proof-like and specimen strikes can also achieve strong premiums, especially when preserved in flawless condition. The 1985 Canada 1 cent coin is therefore more than just a piece of pocket change. It represents a turning point in Canadian coinage history. The introduction of a Canadian-designed effigy, the continuation of the bronze tradition, and the creation of distinct collectible varieties. It bridges the gap between the older generation of cents and the modernized pennies that would follow. For collectors, it offers history, artistry, and variety all wrapped into a single small copper coin. In high grade, it transforms from a common penny into a highly desirable collectible worth thousands of times its original face value, proving yet again that in the world of coins, even the smallest denominations can carry the greatest stories. Next up, 1984 Canada 1 cent coin. The 1984 Canada 1 cent coin is one of the most important modern Canadian pennies, and to collectors it represents the end of one era and the beginning of another. While at first glance, it may look like just another copper-colored coin with the familiar maple leaf design, It is, in fact, the very last Canadian cent to feature the long-standing effigy of Queen Elizabeth Thecu by Arnold Machine. That alone makes it a significant coin in Canadian numismatic history, but its importance goes even deeper when you place it within the broader timeline of Canadian coinage. On the reverse of the coin, we see the classic maple leaf twig design created by George Edward Kruger Gray. This design, first introduced in 1937 under King George VI, had by 1984 already been in use for nearly 5 decades. It became the enduring image of the Canadian penny, with 2 maple leaves attached to a twig, symbolizing strength, resilience, and the natural beauty of Canada. Generations of Canadians grew up with this design in their pockets, purses, and piggy banks. By 1984, it had become not just a coin design but a cultural symbol. The obverse of the 1984 cent is where its true significance lies. This was the final year that Canadian coinage carried the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by British sculptor Arnold Machine. First introduced in 1965, this effigy showed the Queen wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, a formal and regal depiction that had become familiar to Canadians for nearly 2 decades. Machine's portrait was elegant, traditional, and distinctly British in style. However, by the early 1980s, the time had come for a change. In 1985, the Royal Canadian Mint would replace Machine's portrait with a new effigy by Dora de Patery Hunt, marking the first time a Canadian artist's design would appear on the Queen's coinage. That means the 1984 penny represents the very last year of the Machine era, making it a crucial end-of-type coin. Compositionally, the 1984 cent was still struck in the traditional bronze alloy of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. This gives it that distinctive heavy feel and rich reddish-brown color that collectors love. These bronze cents were solid and durable, and they aged with character, developing beautiful natural tones when stored away for decades. For many collectors, the 1984 cent is also one of the last truly classic pennies before the shift toward more cost-effective plated coins later in the 1990s. Another interesting detail is that while the 1984 cent was minted in large numbers for circulation, there are also proof-like and specimen examples that were produced for collector sets. These coins display far superior craftsmanship compared to circulation strikes, with sharper detail, mirrored fields, and frosted designs. Collectors today often seek out these examples, as they show the coin in its finest possible form, a fitting tribute to the last year of the Machine effigy. Historically, the 1984 penny also tells us about the shifting identity of Canadian coinage. Until then, Canadian coins had relied on portraits of the Queen sculpted by British artists. But with the upcoming 1985 change, Canada was asserting more of its own cultural independence by commissioning a Canadian artist to design the new effigy. The 1984 penny is therefore not just a coin, but a marker of Canadian heritage, bridging the gap between tradition and national artistic expression. When it comes to value, circulated examples of the 1984 Canada 1-cent coin remain extremely common. As millions were struck, these are typically worth just face value, or a few cents to collectors. However, the story changes when we consider high-grade uncirculated examples. Coins preserved in mint state condition, with full red luster and no marks, are highly desirable. Professional grading services like PCGS and ICCS have certified some superb examples. And at the very top levels, MS66 and MS67. These coins become true condition rarities. In today's numismatic market, a high-grade 1984 Canada 1-cent coin can sell for around $35,000 USD, particularly if it is a fully red gem example. Proof-like and specimen strikes from mint sets also command strong premiums, especially when kept in their original mint packaging. So the 1984 Canada 1-cent coin is much more than just another penny. It is the farewell issue of the Arnold Machine portrait, the last of a regal era before Canada moved toward its own artistic identity and coinage. It embodies both tradition and transition, making it a key coin for any serious Canadian collector. In high-grade condition, it has proven to be a surprisingly valuable and sought-after piece, worth hundreds of times its face value. Beyond its monetary worth, however, it represents a turning point in Canadian history, where a simple 1-cent coin became the symbol of a nation, moving forward into a new age of design, artistry, and identity. So as we close this chapter, remember this: every penny holds a story, every coin carries a legacy, and the smallest piece of change can be worth far more than its face value. If you treasure history, passion, and the hunt for hidden value. Then these coins are not just collectibles, they are timeless pieces of Canada's soul. Subscribe now and join us on the hunt for rare coins, hidden treasures, and the priceless stories they carry.